Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Sara walks us through her time at Michigan, working toward both a bachelor's and master's in engineering, as well as how she was able to land an internship alongside other MBAs at Microsoft to help launch her career into strategy and corporate development in the cloud computing space. We learn how her technical background was an asset and about her thought process of transitioning to Google's corp dev team instead of the next shiny startup in Silicon Valley. Enjoy. All right, Sara, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So it'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sara. I currently work as part of Google's corporate development team. Originally, I'm from Michigan, went to school at University of Michigan studying industrial and operations engineering. I have both my bachelor's and my master's in that. Pivoted from engineering to tech and tech business and finance. After graduating, I went to work full-time at Microsoft doing strategy and M&A. After that, had a career in venture capital at M12, Microsoft's venture fund. And now I'm here at Google doing M&A and investments for Google and Alphabet more broadly.
Very cool track. A little bit different than what we typically have on the pod. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about your time back in undergrad at Michigan. Were you, tell me about what you were thinking you were going to do. Did you have any family in like strategy or M&A, or did you have family engineers? What was kind of the background? Did they kind of guide you, or were you like, I'm going on my own path?
Yeah, great question. I actually came into school wanting to be a math major. Took Calc 3, honors Calc 3 at Michigan, and quickly realized, pure math was not for me. I had a few friends that were a couple of years older that were in industrial and operations engineering program. And the way that they explained it to me is this is a mix, the degree is really a mix between the business world and the engineering world. So it's basically business with a heavy quantitative background and a lot of emphasis on kind of financial modeling and financial engineering. And I thought that was kind of the perfect intersection for me. It kind of combined my strengths in math with my desire to kind of be in a more business role. And so transferred to the School of Engineering and ended up just being a great fit for me and kind of what I wanted to do.
And so when did you make that transition, like sophomore year or junior year?
Yeah, sophomore year that I made the transfers and came on over.
Can you tell me about your internships during school? Like how you progressed and what you did through there?
Yeah, absolutely. I had one internship that I did for full time. I took a semester off and worked for Mercedes-Benz R&D. And as part of that, it was very typical for an industrial engineer. I did project engineering. I actually led their EPA emissions testing program for North America.
Oh, wow. As just a 6-month program? How did you get that? How do you lead that? It seems like a big deal.
It was a little bit of a big deal. 1 month into my internship, my manager left and they said, well, you've been here for 1 month. Here you go until we find someone else. And so it was a great experience and very cool to kind of work at an automotive company and kind of develop their process and also do a lot of process improvement as part of what they had been doing for years, kind of the same way.
That's interesting to me that after a month they were willing to do that. Do you think it was out of necessity or out of because they saw something in you? You can be honest. You don't worry about we won't be bragging. Just be honest.
I hope it's a mix of both, but it was definitely necessity drove it a lot. I think, getting someone into role and up to speed, is not something you can do immediately. And so in the interim, they had someone there that was covering all the bases and was able to drive the process forward. And so they kind of let me run with it.
What does even a project engineer do?
It is a lot of coordination.
Like day to day. Okay, so you're coordinating with the other engineers. You're kind of like the lead.
It is. It's kind of a project management role mixed with an engineering role where you kind of oversee the entire process for emissions testing. So we were bringing in vehicles, getting them tested at regular intervals, running those reports, and then giving the cars back and submitting this testing to the EPA.
Okay, and that was after your sophomore year or after your junior year?
This
Sorry, that was
was
6 months. That was 6 months kind of when?
Yeah, so as part of my junior year, kind of, I took a semester off and did this. And so it was very valuable to have some full-time experience and kind of infuse some thinking into kind of what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do as I went forward and kind of in the courses I took, what I wanted to learn a little bit further. So I thought it was a great experience and highly encourage anyone that wants to take some time off and get some real world experience to do that.
It looks like you jumped right into another internship at Goldman after that. Can you tell me about how you even landed that? Because I think a lot of people on this podcast are like, Goldman Sachs, it's like the end all be all. Tell me how you landed that. What type of internship was it for? What group? Stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. During my junior year, I don't think I had a strong conviction one way or the other in terms of what I wanted to get into. After my co-op at Mercedes-Benz, I kind of wanted more business experience, not necessarily knowing entirely what that meant. And through the formal kind of recruiting process at Michigan was, lined up with interviews at several different companies, some management consulting, some banks. And so had an interview lined up with Goldman Sachs. Interview process went really well. I think they really enjoyed kind of somebody with an engineering background, bringing a little bit more like quantitative chops into their group. And ended up landing the internship and joining Goldman Sachs for a summer in their credit risk and advisory group, thinking more about, part of their overall finance division, thinking about credit risk and more client advisory.
Awesome. So you kind of finished that up, went back to school for, it looks like a semester.
I did, yes. And so, had the return offer to go back there full time, decided actually to stay at Michigan and pursue a fifth year and finish out my master's. And so University of Michigan has this great program through the Tauber Institute where they combine Ross Business School and School of Engineering into a joint program. And so they have MBAs, Masters of Engineering and Masters of Supply Chain students come together. And it kind of gives an interdisciplinary look across those fields and kind of better prepares each of those fields, engineering with the business tools that they needed, business students with a little bit of more of the engineering and supply chain, and supply chain with engineering and business. And so a really kind of nice interdisciplinary program across the two schools.
Sounds like the people in that program would be really sharp, or at least have a more quantitative background. Can you tell me about like what people from that program typically go on to do? Is it kind of like what you did? You ended up going strategy and M&A, right? Is that typical, or it sounds like that sounds more like an MBA type exit?
It's a bit atypical. Program, I think, to your point, I think it does. It's a very high bar to get into the program, and I think it is an amazing opportunity to both learn different skills and learn from the different people in the program. And so, typical routes folks from the program go into is, operations role, supply chain at companies. Oftentimes, they accelerate very quickly in their career. They're leading kind of global supply chains for companies like Tesla, Apple, Borg Warner.
Almost like where the pinnacle is like the COO for one of these.
Yes, it really does kind of churn out that type of role.
Okay.
But that being said, I think the skills that you learn can be applicable across a lot of different industries. And I had other friends that went into more management consulting roles, some to investment banking, and then me that went into kind of more of a strategy and an M&A role.
So that's like a 1-year program?
Typically, it's, a combination of your undergrad and your master's. And so you take courses through your undergrad, and that's why you're able to finish it up in a fifth year.
In 5 years. Okay. And so tell me about how you started recruiting for Microsoft when you kind of started thinking, strategy or M&A is kind of interesting for me. Was it like between your fourth and fifth year or like in your fifth year?
Yeah, it was between my fourth and fifth year that they started the Tauber recruiting cycle. It's a little bit more of a structured recruiting process. So the Tauber Institute has corporate partners. They have Amazon, Borg Warner, Microsoft, and others, Boeing and others that, participate in a more structured way. And so there's a set of interviews. And at the end, it's actually a matching program. And so you rank the companies that you thought were most interesting after the interview process. They rank you and you actually get matched into internships. And
that's a great open problem, great operations problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like a game theory, rather.
Absolutely. And so very optimized to kind of deliver the best outcomes for both the companies and for the students looking for experiences. And so went through the interview process with Microsoft as part of that and ultimately got matched into their internship.
Very cool. And tell me a little bit about what that internship was like. This was kind of a first strategy role for you, right?
Absolutely. I think
Did
this
it
role at
feel
Microsoft.
super like non-technical for you? Did it feel like a good match? And tell me about how you felt like, okay, this is something I'm going to do full time.
It was a brand new space for me. I had not worked in tech before. The group that I joined was focused on what was then Microsoft's server and tool business. And so, thinking about cloud computing, backend infrastructure, all things that I had no experience in. So day one of the job, kind of came in and I was like, great, what is the cloud? Let's start there. But the summer internship was an incredible opportunity. I think it was very much, drinking from a fire hose. I think it was a lot to learn at once. But, also a great opportunity to kind of bring some more operational engineering skills into more of a strategy project. And so the summer was focused around one strategy project and having kind of the ability to structure that, think about, cost synergies, think about, where are the revenue opportunities for Microsoft to accelerate some of their businesses. And then at the end of the summer, present to leadership on, what are opportunities for the business. I think was a phenomenal experience. I think learning the
Sounds
entire
cool.
through and having kind of a tangible project at the end to present was great.
Were you nervous on that final presentation? I'm sure that's nerve-wracking to like leadership having to go up. And how many? One of the questions that popped in my head is this are you doing this internship alongside other MBAs, or are you doing this along undergrads?
It's alongside other MBAs, and so for
Okay.
this project, it was me paired with an MBA, and we had a joint project together.
And that's pretty impressive. It's kind of like you never even got an MBA, but you get this MBA internship.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was part of Microsoft's MBA internship experience. And so, got all the perks that went along with that and got to meet the incredible MBAs that Microsoft had hired and recruited kind of across the business.
Is that because the program in Michigan is so selective that they're willing to do that?
Yes, I think so. I think, previously on that team, they had hired another, master's student similar to my trajectory onto the team and had phenomenal experience with him. I think he was very smart and ended up being a pretty core part of the team. And so they were willing to kind of take on more students from this pathway.
Good, he paved the way. Good. For that program. Good rep. Okay. So you're kind of going through, you do the final presentation, Microsoft business takes off because of your presentation, right? Since then, because they've been doing really well.
I will say actually at the time, the leader of the group and our executive sponsor was Satya Nadella before he became CEO. And so he was the ultimate stakeholder for our project. And I think that was a phenomenal experience. Ultimately, I ended up joining Microsoft full time after my master's. And by that time, he had been promoted to CEO. So it was a great opportunity to get to kind of work with him before he took on that outsized role at the company.
For sure. A little harder to get in touch with them probably. But anyway, so you're kind of coming through this program, you did the internship, you get the return offer. Do you accept on the spot, or do you say, hey, I need to shop this a little bit. I need to kind of figure out what my other options are?
I was waiting to hear back from Microsoft. And so I went through more of a formal recruiting process at Michigan. I was recruiting at mostly management consulting firms and talking through them. And then kind of later on.
What did you think about the interview process of a McKinsey Bain BCG case interview process, or an Oliver Wyman, whoever you're interviewing with, to a strategy in M&A interview?
It was actually very similar. And so the interview process for Microsoft revolved around different case studies. And so it was actually a very similar process that Microsoft had.
Did they expect you to know reps of like how to run an M&A process?
It was less geared towards an M&A process and more through the strategic thinking. How would you approach this problem? Open-ended kind of questions to get a sense of, how do you think through a problem?
Which makes sense. They probably have their own bankers. They probably hire bankers when they need to, or whatnot. Or is that not true? Do you guys have your own, do you guys run the whole process yourself?
I can't comment on the internal process at Microsoft, but there is, I think we do all, internally we do a lot of different analysis. We run the process, we do financial modeling. It's a pretty comprehensive process.
And did you feel like your degree prepared you for the financial modeling aspect, or did you feel like you had to do some self-study for that?
It's interesting, the type of modeling in general that I learned through my master's program was actually a lot more detailed, and building kind of much more complex, scenario analysis and forecasting models.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing some of that, I think, was actually a very, super skill to the M&A team and kind of bolstering our quantitative abilities. But fundamentally, the modeling you need is much more at a simple level. So I think it was still a learning curve to understand, specific to M&A, how to model a deal, how to think through the process, how to think through synergies, and ultimately arrive at kind of a recommendation and valuation.
Great. So you are waiting on that Microsoft offer. Is it typical that they take a little bit of time with their MBA interns as the internship, or you already kind of in other processes with consulting? What was your thought process? Go consulting, go back to Microsoft. What was the thoughts in terms of, I mean, you clearly enjoyed your time there that summer.
I really enjoyed my time. I think I was, hoping to get the return offer from Microsoft. Given the team was so small, I think it was just an open question on if they would have the headcount or not to bring on someone new. And so, had to kind of obligatory go through the process with other companies. Ultimately, I wanted to kind of look at the entire package that I was being offered. And when the Microsoft offer came in, it was a no-brainer for me. I think it was exactly kind of what I wanted to do next, and a very easy decision for me. And so stopped recruiting with any other firms and accepted it actually the very next day. So
awesome. How'd you feel about moving out to the West Coast?
It was a big change. I think most folks that I was friends with in Michigan either ended up in Chicago or New York. And so not many people were talking about moving to the West Coast. I had not any familiarity with Seattle before my internship, but spending a summer in Seattle was beautiful and was just absolutely great to get a chance to go back.
Very cool. So you're graduating from your master's program. You're gearing up to start there. Tell me about that kind of first month and what it was like. And you're obviously doing a lot of training, probably some fun. And then I guess tell me the month after your training finished, like when you actually hit the ground and did it feel natural because you'd already kind of done the internship? Did you feel like you were catching up at all? I know that you said a little bit about the M&A and stuff like that, but just to get people a sense of what was the hardest part about that.
Absolutely. It was extremely unnatural. I think the summer consisted of kind of a broader strategy project, so very focused on one ongoing strategy project. When I joined full time, probably 80% of my time was focused on M&A and only 20% was focused on more general strategy. So it was, a lot to dive into. Folks on the team had, 10 years plus of banking experience, very, very sharp and talented folks that I worked with. I remember, I think it was day 2 when I started, they were like, we're looking at XYZ deal. We need you to put together a financial model for the company and some preliminary thoughts. And I was like, okay, great. And, my colleague looked at me and she's like, you seem a little lost. Do you know what you're doing? Have you done a model before? And I was like, actually, I haven't done a financial model before of this kind. But if you kind of just walk me through the general overview, I think I can get it. And her question back was, didn't you learn this during your MBA? And I was like, oh, I don't have my MBA. And I think it was a little bit of a, oh, why did we hire you moment? But I feel like I proved the team wrong a little bit. I was a quick learner. Of course, a lot of time to kind of learn the fundamentals and basics, and soon actually became kind of the go-to person for all financial modeling on the team.
And how long do you think it took you to get there? 3 months, 4 months?
4 to 6 months to really feel comfortable. And after a year, I think I was the go-to person on the team. And so I think the engineering kind of quantitative background helped to kind of absorb and learn all these new things. But it was definitely a big learning curve. And it was great that they had the patience for me to kind of get up to speed and learn the processes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're kind of there for a couple of years. Tell me how things progressed. So you became go-to financial model. Any other kind of things that emerge or change from year 1 to year 2, or you're just like looking at a ton of deals, probably consummating some of them, correct? And then passing on a lot of them, I'm sure. But then tell me a little bit about just how things progress and when you started thinking, hey, this ventures thing is kind of interesting, or if it came out of the blue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, over my tenure on the M&A team at Microsoft, we were very focused on, Microsoft's cloud and enterprise business. And so, it's a place that's not as, natural to think about in tech because it's a lot of back-end infrastructure, it's tools developers use, it's cybersecurity for your infrastructure. And so learning just those areas, I think, is always a learning curve, no matter kind of what area within cloud. So every new project was a little bit like, let's learn this from scratch and let's, learn about the space, learn about the players, the market, what's happening. And so it never got boring. The job always kind of keeps you on your toes because every new area is a new space to think about and learn about. But over time, kind of honed more of the M&A process, the M&A framework and thinking and kind of applying it to deals. Looked at a lot of deals in my time there and ultimately worked on 4 deals that closed.
Mm-hmm.
And ended up being kind of a big contributors to Microsoft's cloud and enterprise business. And so
It's awesome.
really great deals that I got a chance to work on.
And do you feel like you mentioned there was a relatively small team for, I mean, Microsoft's obviously huge, but are you able to share kind of like around the size of this strategy and M&A team that you're working for? Like, were you working directly for like one person, 10 people, 3 people? Just to get an idea of like, was it hard jumping between projects, or were you like always on all the deals because it was because you were kind of given that cloud kind of silo?
Yeah, I mean, I think our team was pretty small and tight knit, and I was working on a few deals at a time at any given moment. Did not cover all the deals. I think we had a few folks, that we would split between different projects, and so. For me, I was not working on all the deals, but always had like 3 or 4 deals that I was simultaneously looking at.
Did you feel like it was like banking hours, like as an associate that you hear like 80+ hour weeks, or was it more reasonable, like a 60 to 70?
I think there were definitely very busy weeks, especially kind of getting up to speed. I think, the first, call it 6 months were pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it really depended on deal flow. I think, when deals are hot, you have to be on and active. And when things were a little bit calmer, I think it was a little bit more regular hours.
Like a 50-ish or so, say.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, yeah, tell me about the transition. How did this come up and this jump to, it was called M12, is that correct?
Correct. So while I was working for the M&A team, I had no kind of interest in kind of recruiting or looking out. I think I was still, getting to do a lot of interesting work and a lot of interesting deals. Around kind of my 3-year mark on the team is when Microsoft launched their new venture arm called Microsoft Ventures back in the day. It's now been rebranded as M12.
Okay.
As they launched, I was kind of assigned to help the group kind of think about synergies with Microsoft, getting them connected to the broader, corporate group, and kind of build the relationship with the arm through that. And so, as they look to expand their team and kind of bring on new members, they said, why don't you talk to a few people on our team and get to know us better? And ultimately ended up offering me a position to join the venture arm,
Mm-hmm.
Which was a phenomenal opportunity. And so it came up a little bit more organically through relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up joining M12 as kind of a founding member and helping them kind of build and create out, Microsoft's venture arm.
Were these relationships more because like you just started some coffee chats, you're kind of just exploring? Was there a kind of a goal in your head of like, I want to learn a different, aspect, I want to go, earlier stage? Or was it really just genuine curiosity, you asking interesting questions and them suddenly being like, well, why don't you come and join us? Which one?
A mix of a little bit of both of those things. Our venture group and our M&A group at the time rolled up to the head of our business development.
Okay.
So, our business development org is a pretty senior organization. It's folks who have, 15, 20 years of work experience, naturally tends to skew to more senior roles.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely one of the less experienced younger folks in the org. And I think there was a lot of emphasis in trying to kind of grow and develop the next generation of leaders that would, grow up with the org. And so as part of that, really got opportunities to meet a lot of, different leaders across the broader business development org. And so some of that came naturally from that. And others just came from, building good relationships and, asking good questions.
They had tapped you as future leadership and then you broke their heart. Okay, no, just kidding. So you're there. You're basically doing interesting work, right? You're closing 4 big deals in strategy and M&A for the cloud business at Microsoft. You pivot kind of to still under business development, but you're now looking at earlier stage stuff. Still for cloud or for everything?
For everything. I think
Okay.
I'm heavily tilted on enterprise tech, but it was much broader in terms of kind of the areas that we looked at.
Did you
For
feel like the VC world was harder to close deals or easier to close deals?
much easier.
Mm-hmm.
In VC, you're ultimately, the team is the decision maker. In M&A, there's a lot of different decision makers, a lot of different approvals to get through. And so the process takes a lot longer and requires a lot more input from the business on deals. Whereas VC, I think we can be a lot more nimble and make decisions very quickly.
And most of the time, you're probably investing as venture debt, or were you doing stuff later in the capital structure, like Series A, Series B?
It was mostly later stage. I think the sweet spot was Series A through Series C, but
Okay.
things earlier also did things later.
Was there a certain like level of was there any sort of cap on terms of like assets that you guys could tap if the right deal came along, or like you felt like it's basically like billions of dollars, it didn't matter? Like, could you have, if you had, for example, like there was the next I don't know, the next big CRM coming down and it was like the perfect whatever for perfect enterprise platform for you guys to acquire, could you guys have done like a $500 million or I don't know, a $300 million round or something like that?
I won't get into kind of the structure of the fund, but I will say I think, there was a lot of interest to do, interesting deals and kind of, build a more robust venture arm, which I think now, one of the top corporate VC arms that there is. And I hesitate to say corporate because I think, there's a very strict wall between M12 and broader Microsoft.
Yeah.
Very much kind of runs like a financial VC, is a really great partner to startups. And so they have kind of the full backing of Microsoft and a lot of autonomy to kind of, do what they want and help startups. But at the same time, they are backed by Microsoft. And so you still kind of get the support of the broader group when needed. And that I think is really a defining factor for startups as they think about scaling and growing.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, so you're now been at Microsoft for almost 4 years, first in the strategy M&A, then you kind of pivot to the Microsoft Ventures. Tell me a little bit about what you were thinking kind of coming up on that 4th year in terms of your own career. It sounds like you're getting opportunities. Do you feel like there was new things you needed? Do you feel like there just, did Google come knocking and it was just too interesting of an opportunity? I'd love to hear just that transition, your thought process of jumping from one firm to another, because I know it's super, super common nowadays. But I talked to somebody recently and they were like at a firm for like 15 years. I'm like, that, like straight out of undergrad. I'm like, that's the weirdest thing nowadays. I've never seen that. So like, I like to hear just the thought process of, okay, now is the right time to move versus not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was, naturally kind of poking around, having been at Microsoft for a while. I think, as I looked across my other peers at Microsoft, it was a lot of folks that have been there, 15, 20 plus years. It's really a great place to build your career. I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth. As I kind of looked out in the market, though, I kind of did see the trend where people were, jumping around to companies, getting different experiences. And ultimately, I felt like an opportunity to go to a different company will make me, more marketable longer term and kind of present new opportunities and learning and growth that comes from just,
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was also your first job right out of school.
Exactly. So a little bit of the edge to, what else is out there and kind of see. And Google opportunity came along. It was really just a great fit. It kind of combined my M&A experience with investment and also offered me the opportunity to work at, another huge tech company and kind of see the way that they think through these issues and the spaces that they're looking at.
What was your thought process of moving down to SF? And are you in SF right now, or did you get out because of COVID and everything else?
Yeah, so I for the Google job, I relocated to the Bay Area. I think back then, San Francisco and the Bay Area is the tech epicenter. And so if you want to grow your career, at some point you're going to need to be there. And so kind of took the plunge and kind of went all in with Google and the Bay Area. now with COVID and kind of now people working from home, took the opportunity to pop back up to Seattle to get a little bit more space to work from home. But for the last 2 years, I've been down in the Bay and really loved it. I don't think I can emphasize enough how much movement and tech and conversations happen in the Bay. And, as much as other cities are growing in terms of tech presence, the Bay is still very much the center of gravity and majority of transactions and things happen there. And it's really nice to be plugged into that.
It's interesting you went back up to Seattle, and I assume home is near Michigan? Or
Home was originally Michigan. I think Seattle.
Family in Seattle?
No family, but good friends. And so there's
Yeah.
a little bit of now a home aspect associated with Seattle as well.
Of course. I mean, you're there for 4 years. It makes sense. You're there for 4 years. So that's cool. So like they're like, come up here, come back. Cool. Okay. So
on West Coast hours. So I think that was also a contributing factor as to, stay.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. So you're that transition, it sounds like the opportunity presented itself. Was it through a recruiter? Was it through just your outreach, just networking, kind of stuff like that? Can you talk to me a little bit about how you kind of got the opportunity to even interview? And then was it through like networking, or was it through like a formal process? I think Google's known to be pretty regimented, I think, and pretty thoughtful in terms of how they recruit. But just getting into that process, was there anything special like networking that you did?
Actually, there wasn't anything special in terms of networking that I did for this job. I think a recruiter reached out and, it sounded like an interesting opportunity and I just wanted to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
After hearing more about it, it sounded very, very interesting. Ended up going through kind of more of their formal recruiting process, which, I think it's a very robust, very long process. I think end to end took maybe 4.5 months.
Oh my gosh.
And so, was a very long process, but also very thorough. You got to meet the team. You got to learn a lot about the Google culture, kind of how they think. And ultimately, I think Google really prides itself in having a high bar of talent and hiring. And so the process kind of helps make sure that the right talent is coming through.
What was your thought process of going there versus going to like a startup, or taking your talent to like a Series C or something like that, or trying to get in pre-IPO? Like what was your thought process of that? Is something like you liked the structure, or the offer that would just the offers that just happened to come in during that time? Because 4 months, theoretically, you weren't just looking at Google. Were there other potential opportunities that were interesting to you? They came up, and how did you think about that?
Briefly considered startup opportunity. I think at the time I wanted more transactional experience, and you really get that at the big tech firms.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is doing, looking at the breadth and kind of velocity of deals that a Microsoft or Google is doing. There's very few places I could go from Microsoft that would kind of give me the opportunity to get a lot of exposure and a lot of learning in a condensed amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
One of those.
What if you went away from deal making, though? Is there another potential, exit? They call it in bank exit opportunity. Is there another exit opportunity from a strategy and corp dev role? So like leaning more back to your strategy that you could have done?
Definitely, I think there was opportunities. I think for me, I wanted to stay in the VC and M&A world.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of opportunities working kind of big tech. You get to work with kind of leaders across the industry, which I think is a phenomenal experience, and very little roles inside companies get the opportunity to do that. And so for me, I think I wanted to continue having that type of experience and building those types of relationships. Versus at a startup, I think it's very fast paced. You get to learn a lot as you go, but you're very focused on kind of building your core product. Whereas at a larger company, I have the chance to kind of get a breadth of different products, different areas, different sizes, and so really enjoy having that breadth look.
For sure, very cool. Well, it sounds like you're in a great spot. Congratulations on the transition and all the success so far. Before I call the pod, we're coming up on a little over a half hour. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we call it? Any kind of words of wisdom that you've kind of experienced, whether it's career, whether it's anything else as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my biggest advice is, I came from a very non-traditional background. Wherever you're trying to go, I think there's a pathway to it. Typically corporate development, it's typically, business school, investment banking, corporate development. But that's not the only pathway. And so, wherever you are, I think there's always a kind of a path to get to where you want. And I think some of the best careers are built with kind of jumping around through interesting roles. And so that would be kind of my biggest advice for folks is to, not get too caught up in, traditional backgrounds and actually have kind of some unique experiences to bring to the table.
I love it. Kind of started all the way back in your Mercedes-Benz project when you were thrown to the wolves. But very cool. Well, thank you, Sara, so much for taking the time to share your story. Really appreciate it. I think the listeners will love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.